You're not tired of life. You're tired of pretending. That exhaustion you feel, it's not from working too hard or sleeping too little. It's from performing a version of yourself that everyone else can handle. And the lonelier you feel in crowded rooms, the more you know something fundamental has been stolen from you. Carl Jung once wrote, "Loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to you. If you ignore this truth any longer, you'll disappear completely into a life that was never yours to begin with. Let me show you what's really happening." Picture this. You're in a room full of people talking about weekend plans, celebrity gossip, or surface-level complaints. The conversation feels hollow, but you participate anyway. Then, without thinking, you say something real, something that matters, something that cuts through the noise. Silence. Not the good kind, the uncomfortable kind. The kind that tells you you've said too much, felt too much, been too much. Again. So you smile and backtrack. "Sorry, I don't know why I said that." But you do know. You said it because it was true. And truth in a world built on pleasant lies is treated like a contagion. This moment, this subtle rejection of your authentic voice, builds an invisible wall between you and everyone else. Society rewards conformity and comfortable illusions. Depth is treated like a social disease. Maybe you remember being a child asking the questions that made adults squirm. Why do people say they're fine when they're not? Why do we pretend to like people we don't? Instead of answers, you got silence. Or worse, don't ask so much. So you learned. You learned to dim your curiosity, soften your observations, and hide the parts of you that saw too clearly. You learned that being real was dangerous, that caring deeply was something to be ashamed of, that your natural way of being in the world was somehow wrong. But what if it wasn't? What if the problem was never you? Here's what no one tells you about being a deep thinker. You become two people. There's the person on stage, smiling, nodding, blending in. And there's the person backstage watching, feeling, knowing what everyone else is pretending not to see. Carl Jung called this the battle between your persona and your shadow. Your persona is the mask you wear to be accepted. Your shadow is everything you've had to hide to survive. Think of Sarah, a 32-year-old marketing manager who's mastered the art of being agreeable. At work, she's the team player who never rocks the boat. She laughs at jokes that aren't funny, agrees with strategies she knows won't work, and pretends not to notice when her boss takes credit for her ideas. That's her persona, perfectly calibrated for approval. But her shadow knows. Her shadow sees the manipulation, feels the injustice, and carries the weight of all the words she doesn't say. Her shadow is exhausted from watching Sarah betray herself 40 hours a week. When Sarah goes home, she doesn't relax. She dissects every interaction, every moment where she could have spoken up but didn't. She replays conversations, imagining what she should have said, feeling the weight of her own cowardice. This isn't overthinking. This is her soul screaming for authenticity. This is the curse of awareness. You see the game everyone's playing, but playing along feels like slow suicide. Not playing along feels like social suicide. You call it empathy, but maybe it's just the way you disappear. The world wants your mask, but your soul demands the truth. This tension doesn't just make you tired, it makes you question your own sanity. Am I overthinking? Am I too sensitive? Am I the problem? No. You're awake in a world that loves to sleep. Think about the last conversation you had where someone asked, "How are you?" Did you tell them the truth? Or did you give them the socially acceptable answer? Good, thanks, or while your inner world was anything but good. This performance isn't kindness, it's self-abandonment. Every smile you fake, every truth you swallow, every time you make yourself smaller to fit into spaces that were never meant for you. You're not being kind. You're being complicit in your own erasure. The stage metaphor runs deeper than you think. On stage, actors know they're performing. They get to remove their costumes at the end of the night. But deep thinkers live in a world where the performance never ends. The costume becomes your skin. The script becomes your voice. The character becomes your identity. Until you forget who you were before you learned to perform. Take a moment. Right now. When was the last time you said exactly what you meant without editing yourself first? When was the last time you let someone see your unfiltered thoughts without worrying about their comfort? When was the last time you were you, not the version of you that makes others comfortable, but the real you? If you can't remember, you're not alone. Most deep thinkers have been performing for so long, they've forgotten what their authentic voice sounds like. The exhaustion you feel isn't from life itself. It's from performing life. It's from being a human being pretending to be a human doing. And the deeper you think, the more energy this performance costs. Here's what Jung understood that most people don't. Your shadow isn't your enemy. It's the part of you that remembers who you were before the world taught you to be afraid of your own depth. It holds your power, your truth, your unfiltered essence. It's not something to be eliminated. It's something to be integrated. But first you have to stop running from it. Carl Jung warned us, the more intelligent and self-aware a person is, the more they suffer from the general unconsciousness of society. Here's the truth that no one wants to acknowledge your depth threatens people. Not because you're superior, but because your presence forces them to confront their own Carl Jung shadow. All the parts of themselves they've buried to fit in. This is why deep thinkers become emotional dumping grounds. People sense your capacity to hold pain, so they pour their unprocessed emotions into you like you're a human vessel. But the moment you need support, they're suddenly busy unavailable, or going through their own stuff. This isn't coincidence. This is projection. The unconscious process where people give you what they can't face in themselves. Meet David, a 29-year-old therapist who thought his training would help him navigate relationships. His friends call him at midnight when their relationships implode, when their careers crumble, when their carefully constructed lives fall apart. He listens for hours, offers wisdom, holds space for their pain. He's the unofficial therapist for everyone in his circle. But when David's father died last year, those same friends sent brief texts and changed the subject when he tried to share his grief. When he needed to talk about his depression, they suddenly had emergencies. When he asked for support, they reminded him he was the strong one and should figure it out. Why? Because David's pain reminded them of their own. His vulnerability exposed their emotional unavailability. His need for support revealed their inability to give what they'd been taking. David realized he wasn't their friend. He was their unpaid emotional labor. They didn't love him. They loved what he could do for them. The moment he stopped being useful, he became invisible. This is the silent theft of your inner fire. You become so good at holding space for others that you forget to hold space for yourself. You become so skilled at seeing others' pain that you become blind to your own. But here's the deeper truth. This dynamic doesn't happen by accident. Deep thinkers often unconsciously attract emotional vampires because giving feels safer than receiving. If you're always the helper, you never have to be vulnerable. If you're always the strong one, you never have to admit you're breaking. Jung called this the transcendent function, the unconscious patterns that keep us stuck in familiar pain rather than facing unfamiliar growth. David wasn't just a victim of selfish friends. He was unconsciously choosing relationships where his depth would be consumed rather than celebrated. The cruel irony is that the very gift that draws people to you, your emotional intelligence, your capacity for depth, becomes the weapon they use to drain you. They don't mean to. They're not consciously malicious. They're just unconscious. And unconscious people consume conscious energy, like black holes consume light. You're not overthinking. You're seeing clearly. That clarity unsettles others because it forces them to question the comfortable lies they've built their lives on. Here's what happens when you start speaking truth in a world built on illusion. People get angry, not at what you said, but at how you made them feel. Your honesty becomes their mirror, and most people don't like what they see reflected back. They'll call you negative, dramatic, too intense. They'll tell you to lighten up or not everything has to be so deep. But what they're really saying is, stop making me feel things I've been avoiding. This is where most deep thinkers make a fatal mistake. They internalize this criticism. They start believing they really are too much, too sensitive, too intense. They begin the slow process of self-amputation, cutting away pieces of themselves to fit into a world that was never designed for their depth. But here's what Jung understood that most people don't. The world doesn't want you to heal. It wants you to function. It doesn't want you to wake up. It wants you to be useful while staying asleep. Your depth isn't a flaw to be fixed. It's a frequency that can't be faked. And when you stop trying to dim that frequency to make others comfortable, you discover something revolutionary. The right people aren't threatened by your depth. They're drawn to it like moths to flame. But first, you have to stop apologizing for the light you carry. The Carl Jung Shadow Work isn't about becoming more acceptable to others. It's about becoming more acceptable to yourself. It's about integrating the parts of you that the world taught you to hide. It's about remembering that your sensitivity isn't a wound. It's a superpower disguised as vulnerability. Here's what happens when you try to hide your depth. You start disappearing from your own life. Maybe you've tried it. Softening your words, dimming your insights, shrinking your presence to fit into smaller spaces. You smile when you want to scream. You agree when you want to argue. You perform happiness when your soul is grieving. The world applauds this performance. You're so easygoing. You never cause drama. You're such a good listener, but inside, you're suffocating. Lisa learned this the hard way. A 35-year-old artist who spent years hiding her intensity behind a bubbly, accommodating persona. She dated men who called her chill because she never expressed her actual needs. She worked jobs that drained her because she was afraid to seem difficult. She attended social gatherings that felt like emotional warfare because she was terrified of being seen as antisocial. For years, Lisa believed this was maturity. This was growth. This was learning to get along with people. But her art told a different story. Her paintings grew darker, more fragmented. Her sculptures became smaller, more contained. Her creativity was suffocating under the weight of her performance. The breaking point came during a dinner party where everyone was complaining about their first world problems, delayed flights, slow Wi-Fi, expensive coffee. Lisa had just received news that her childhood friend was dying of cancer. The contrast between the trivial complaints and her devastating reality felt surreal. When someone asked why she was quiet, she made a choice. For once, she told the truth. She shared what was really on her mind, the fragility of life, the pain of watching someone you love fade away, the strange experience of grieving while surrounded by people worried about their Instagram stories. The table went silent, not with compassion, but with discomfort. Someone quickly changed the subject back to vacation plans. Another person mentioned how heavy the conversation had gotten. Lisa felt the familiar shame rising. She had been too much again. But then something shifted. Instead of apologizing, she stayed with the feeling. She let herself feel angry at their emotional cowardice. She let herself feel disgusted by their superficiality. She let herself feel the full weight of her disappointment. That's when Lisa understood they didn't want her presence. They wanted her performance. They wanted her to laugh at their jokes, validate their complaints, and disappear her own complexity for their comfort. But here's what Lisa discovered, and what you're about to discover when you stop performing. You lose superficial approval, but gain something infinitely more valuable: inner clarity. Your silence isn't judgment, it's survival. Your withdrawal isn't antisocial, it's self-protection. Your exhaustion isn't weakness. It's proof that you're carrying too much of what was never yours to begin with. The moment you stop performing, empathy is the moment you start receiving it. Not from everyone, not from most people, but from the few who matter, from the ones who can hold your depth without drowning in it, from the souls who recognize yours. This is where the Carl Jung Shadow Work begins, not with fixing yourself, but with accepting yourself. Not with becoming more palatable, but with becoming more authentic. Jung wrote, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Why? Because once you accept yourself completely, you stop accepting unacceptable treatment from others. You stop tolerating relationships that require you to be less than you are. You stop participating in conversations that insult your intelligence and experiences that diminish your soul. This terrifies people. Your self-acceptance becomes their mirror. Your boundaries become their wake-up call. Your refusal to perform becomes their invitation to get real or get lost. Most choose to get lost, and that's okay. Better to be alone with your truth than surrounded by people who need you to lie. Your exhaustion isn't a character flaw. It's a compass pointing you home to yourself. Every boundary you've been afraid to set, every truth you've been afraid to speak, every time you've made yourself smaller, these aren't signs of weakness. They're signs that you've forgotten something essential. You are not responsible for other people's comfort with your existence. Setting boundaries doesn't make you cold, it makes you whole. Choosing solitude over shallow connection doesn't make you antisocial, it makes you selective. Refusing to carry other people's emotional baggage doesn't make you heartless, it makes you conscious. Carl Jung understood this. The privilege of a lifetime is being who you are, not who others need you to be, not who society expects you to be, who you actually are in all your complicated, intense, unfiltered truth. Shadow work isn't about becoming a better person. It's about becoming a whole person. It's about integrating the parts of yourself you've been hiding, shaming, or apologizing for. Your sensitivity isn't something to overcome. It's your superpower disguised as a wound. Your tendency to overthink isn't a mental health problem. It's your mind's way of processing a world that most people experience on autopilot. Start here. Stop explaining yourself to people who are determined to misunderstand you. Stop dimming your light for people who prefer the darkness. Stop carrying water for those who refuse to dig their own wells. This isn't about becoming selfish. It's about becoming self-full. It's about filling your own cup first so you can pour from overflow, not from emptiness. Think about Marcus, a 28-year-old software developer who spent years believing his analytical nature was a social handicap. He would apologize for asking questions that others found too deep. He would dumb down his insights to avoid making others feel inadequate. He would laugh at jokes he found intellectually insulting because he was afraid of seeming pretentious. Then Marcus started a side project, a podcast about the intersection of technology and philosophy. He stopped apologizing for his curiosity. He stopped dumbing down his thoughts. He started speaking to the part of people that was hungry for depth, not the part that was threatened by it. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of people reached out saying they finally found someone who spoke their language. Marcus realized he hadn't been too much. He had been hanging around people who were too little. Ask yourself, what would change if you believed that your depth was a gift, not a burden? What would you say if you weren't afraid of being too much? Who would you become if you stopped performing for people who will never truly see you? The answer to these questions isn't something you think your way to. It's something you feel your way to. It's something you live your way to, one authentic moment at a time. Your Carl Jung shadow holds the keys to your liberation. Every trait you've been taught to hide, every impulse you've learned to suppress, every part of yourself you've been shamed for. This is where your power lives. The work isn't to eliminate your shadow. The work is to befriend it. To understand that your intensity isn't a problem to be solved, but a frequency to be embraced. To realize that your depth isn't a social liability, but a spiritual gift. Deep thinkers aren't here to be understood by everyone, and that's not a failure. It's your purpose. You're here to awaken the few who are ready. You're here to be a mirror for those brave enough to look beyond the surface. You're here to speak the truths that others feel but can't name, to ask the questions that others sense but fear to voice. Stop apologizing for your depth. The world doesn't need another filtered, watered-down version of human consciousness. It needs your rawness, your presence, your courage to feel deeply in a world that's forgotten how to feel at all. It needs your willingness to see clearly in a culture that profits from blindness. Your Carl Jung shadow isn't your enemy or your burden. It's your ally, your teacher, your gateway to wholeness. It holds all the power you've given away, all the truth you've been afraid to speak, all the parts of yourself you've abandoned in the hope of being accepted by people who were never capable of truly seeing you. It's time to come home to yourself, not to the version of yourself that makes others comfortable, but to the one that makes you feel alive. As Jung himself wrote, with the wisdom of someone who had walked this path, who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakens. The awakening begins now, not when you feel ready, because you'll never feel ready, not when it's convenient, because it never will be, not when others give you permission, because they never will. Now, your depth is not a problem to be solved or a wound to be healed. It's a frequency to be embraced, a gift to be unwrapped, a truth to be lived. The world is waiting for you to remember who you are beneath all the masks, all the performance, all the fear of being too much for people who are too little. If this resonates with your soul, let me know in the comments. Share one thing you've been afraid to say out loud, and if you're ready to go deeper into this work of reclaiming your authentic self, subscribe for more insights that honor your complexity instead of trying to simplify it. The journey home to yourself starts with a single step: choosing truth over approval, depth over shallow authenticity, over performance. Take that step today. Your real life, is waiting.